There we go.
Chris speaks tonight with historian Dan Korn, who is one of the most premier experts I've ever met on the Civil War. There's not many topics he doesn't know about, from the battles to the political aspect. And he's going to talk about a subject tonight that I really don't know anything about. Never was taught it or studied it or had anybody to bring it up. And when he first mentioned it to me, it caught me off guard. I really didn't know what he meant. And they called it the Brown Water War. Um, and I'm guessing that's going to be about the naval battles for the river system.
Yeah, that would be correct. In the harbors.
Okay, so
All right.
at the outbreak of the war, what kind of vessels? I mean, how many vessels did the Confederacy have versus the North?
Well, they basically had almost nothing to start with. They took a number of riverboat tugs and used those to try to put together a navy to start with, and then they came up pretty quickly with the idea of starting to try to build the ironclad rams. Everybody knows, of course, about the CSS Virginia / the Merrimack, but you had a number of these things that were built by the uh, Confederacy to in order to try to stop, break the blockades, do different things. You had the CSS Manassas, the Albemarle, of course, up the CSS Noose. Both of those were in North Carolina. You had the Manassas. You had, of course, the CSS Virginia. You had the CSS Tennessee. These were all ironclad rams that were designed to attack wooden ships and destroy them. And they came up with those in order to try to not only counter the Yankee blockade, but also what the Union came up with, which was the infamous poop turtles. James Eads' creation there with Samuel Pook, that they built these things. They were designed, they were built on the upper Mississippi, what they call it Cairo, Illinois, and all. They were very, very unique in that they only needed 4.5 feet of water to float, and
Wow,
they weighed 100 tons.
100 tons.
100 tons, and they only needed 4.5 feet of water to float. They used a very innovative system. What it looks like, if you were to look at a picture of it, it looks like they put together rows and rows and rows of 55-gallon drums, like what we would put oil in today. That was at the bottom of the keel, and that was the flotation device. And as a result of that, they were able to build these super ships that they could armor clad on the body of the ship and sail up and down the Tennessee, the Cumberland, the Mississippi without fear of running aground, because they only needed 4.5 feet of water. So they could float right over most obstacles that were in their way and then just start dealing death and destruction to Confederate forces. So that was the Brown Water Navy of the Union Army. And it was you had a number of different naval commanders that were involved with it. Samuel Foote, for one, working with Grant and some of the others, in order to that's really what helped Grant get started, was that whole thing, utilizing those along with his infantry troops to start with. But you had others that were trying to stop or break the Yankee blockade. Of course, the Tennessee and everything were involved in other Mobile Bay and other fights. The New Orleans battles, they tried to use ironclads there. Of course, CSS Virginia at Hampton Roads, trying to break that blockade. Which, if the Monitor had not shown up when it did, it would have pretty much destroyed the wooden ships of the blockading squadron that was there at Hampton Roads.
And let
So
me ask you this right here. Before I forget, the Confederacy, obviously the manpower difference was so much, in favor of the North. Navy compared to personnel, how much more personnel was the Union Navy bigger than the Confederacy?
well, the Union Navy was much bigger. The Confederates also relied on the blockade runners, but also on the raiders. The CSS Alabama, for example, the Shenandoah,
Right.
the Florida. Those were ships that were specifically built to be like greyhounds to outrun the naval vessels of the blockading squadrons and to attack, specifically to go after the merchant fleet, but more importantly, to go after the whaling fleet. Those ships in particular, they destroyed 70% of the whaling fleet of the United States and pretty much crippled our efforts in that field forever.
Really?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons
An
why.
interesting fact.
Yeah, that's one. In fact, the Shenandoah did not find out that the war was over until months after the war was over, and they thought they were being lied to when they were first told this. And then they pulled into a neutral port to find out what was going on. That's when they only found out the truth, that the war had ended months earlier. So they did a number on that the whaling fleet, and it in fact it would result in litigation by the United States government in international court against England. It's called the Alabama claims, and it's one of the few times we've actually gone into international court and won the case. Because of the fact that the British government was in violation of their neutrality by allowing these ships to be built in British shipyards, Laird shipyards. So, and the courts ruled against England in this case. That also changed maritime law because of all that. So those are some of the things that occurred. But the Brown Water Navy, again, the idea was to the rivers. If you controlled the rivers, particularly in the western part of the Confederacy, I'm talking the Mississippi River Valley and all that region there, you controlled the region because those were the highways.
These ironclad what you call blockade runner. Well, I mean, were their mission to ram these?
Yes,
and just try to ram them
and then take them out or destroy them. They were built with an iron prow on the front of them that stuck out like an inverted V, and the idea was to take them and ram them into the side of a wooden ship, and make a great big old hole, and then the ship was going to sink. And they were of course they could also try to sink them with their guns too, but they didn't. They never had the amount of firepower that the Union Navy had to work with. They only had one, maybe two ironworks in the entire Confederacy, Tredegar being the main one in Richmond, that could roll the iron plate that they needed, the steel plate and everything that they needed to put over the oak walls and stuff that they were bolted to cover the casemate on these vessels. So
Barrowport, not too far from where I live, was a big one for the Confederacy too.
Yep.
So let me ask you this: you mentioned something about guns. The Confederacy had them put up. Were they successful at all, ever sinking any of these vessels, or did they just not have enough? Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, you had the David, which attacked the USS New Ironsides, and severely damaged her.
I mean, like guns on inland, like in the forts and stuff that they had lined up and protecting.
The battles for Forts Henry and Donaldson, the Fort Henry was built too close to the waterline, and as a result of that, the outer gun ramparts were underwater. And the Cairo, her sister ships, all those were literally sailed right into the fort, the lower parts of the fort, right through those gun ports, and was blasting away at the inner workings of the fort and everything. That's why they realized very quickly, we can't stay here. We got to get out of here. And they left a few guys there to man the guns while the rest of them retreated and ran to Fort Donaldson, which was only about 12 miles away across the river there. And then from that point, once Henry was taken out, they just sailed the gunboats up. Now, Donaldson was a different story because of the fact that the gunboats were coming straight at the fort's main gun batteries, and they were able to use plunging fire against those particular vessels and to stop them from coming up any further. But they cut off the river, and now no Confederate shipping could go up down the river right there. And of course, Grant eventually is going to take Fort Donaldson, That's the first major victory for the Union in the war. And 12,000 troops end up surrendering. And then from there they go and they take Nashville, which is the first Confederate capital to fall to the Yankees during the war. So those things were lethal. They were considered the super ship. The only way you could take them out was to either drop plunging fire down on top of them and take out their stacks and slow them down
So
that way.
What exactly is plunging fire?
Plunging fire is when you're shooting from up above and dropping the shells or the cannon fire down on top of them.
Okay.
Okay. They did the same thing at Drury's Bluff when the Monitor and her other ships tried to reach Richmond. At Drury's Bluff, the Confederates had cannons up on the bluff. That's Fort Darling, and they literally shot down on top of the invading warships. And because of the elevation that was involved, the Monitor and the other ships could not elevate their guns sufficiently high enough to reach those guns that were on the in the battery at Fort Darling on top of Drury's Bluff. So that's plunging fire, and it was very effective, but it was one of the very few ways that you could actually attack and take out those ships. Because you weren't going to take them out shooting at them head straight on. Their armor plating was too good.
Were they? I mean, were the Confederacy were they inflicting damage? I mean, was they making them pay for every?
Well, they tried.
Okay,
they tried. Some of those ships, the Arkansas and some of the others, their power systems, they were steam engines, weren't sufficiently powerful enough to really run the ship well enough in order for the ships to outrun other pursuing enemy vessels. And once they knock out or slow them down enough, you riddle the smokestack with enough shells and stuff, cannonballs and stuff. They're not going to get a good, strong enough head of steam, and they're not going to be able to maintain it. As a result of that, they can't maintain the propulsion with the engine and turning those propellers. And that was one of the problems actually for the Merrimack during the CSS Virginia when it was fighting the Monitor, was that its smokestacks had been damaged the day before by the gunfire from the Cumberland and the Congress. So,
okay, strategically,
and they were slow.
Okay,
they were slow.
You want to defend,
you
want to defend the river, okay? So you got your forts and everything set up. Here's what I don't understand: without control of New Orleans, the rest of the river is basically worthless because you can't get anything else. Why did the Confederacy have skeletal forces?
But you still had the two halves connected together, and so they could ship stuff across the river. They just couldn't ship it down the river to New Orleans and out. But they could get stuff back and forth. And the railroads that were, of course, they crossed the rivers were part of that. So as long as they were able to keep the two sections connected, which they were able to from Vicksburg to Port Hudson until July 4th, 1863, the two halves of the Confederacy were still connected together, and they had other ports that they could ship out of. Galveston, for example, which was stayed open almost the entire war. Mobile Bay until fairly late in the war. New Orleans, of course, got knocked out relatively early. That was, Farragut and his thing.
I was asking this the other day in the group, as far as, the ports falling and everything, would you consider Mobile Bay one of the final nails in the coffin when they lost that port?
When they lost Mobile Bay? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because there goes your best and biggest Gulf port that you had left to work with. It's gone. And on top of that, the Yankee blockading squadrons were actually occupying Ship Island, which is just off the coast there in Gulf of Mexico, and utilizing that as their resupply station. So Mobile Bay, and I don't know if you've ever been there. It is a huge body of water.
Yeah.
But that whole fight took place basically within a 1 square mile area, and it was horrendously intense because of that. But it's a very large bay. You got the two forts that are there, Fort Gaines, and I forget the name of the other one off the top of my head at the moment. Uh,
Bailey or Blakely?
Blakely is part of it, was one of them. Yeah, and then Gaines. But you had a once those are gone, I mean, one by one, that was the whole idea, was to take out, the river, the gunboats on the river were designed to specifically control the rivers. Okay, and then the blockading ships were designed to block off the ports, and then you had invasion fleets that came into the rivers to take out the port cities themselves and take control of the ports. Once those ports are gone, okay, there's pretty much nothing left for them to do, because they everything that so much of what they were getting was imported.
Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you this: with you talking about the Confederacy being, divided, or they weren't divided then. I mean, how important was this really? Because Arkansas had already fallen, Louisiana had fallen. Your battles were taking place in Virginia, and in the West, in Mississippi and Tennessee. How important was it really for them to still be connected?
Well, psychologically, it meant a lot. Um,
Okay, okay,
okay, and
yeah, that's an argument I've made.
Once I mean when Lincoln made the statement about the father of the waters runs unvexed to the seas now, which meant, of course, the Mississippi River was back under the control of the Union. You When that happens, you pretty much have isolated half of the Confederacy. Now, granted, the most populous part of the Confederacy was the East, not the West, but still, those were areas where they were getting food supplies and things from Texas, in Arkansas, cattle, whatever the case may be. That's gone because there's no way for them to get them across without running across the Union Navy ships. They were going up and down that river. Uh,
I've made this argument before, that I was talking about Vicksburg, and I made the theory or whatever, that Vicksburg was nowhere near as a tremendous loss as what they made it to be, because they controlled everything except for that in Port Hudson. That it was more symbolic, almost like Stalingrad was. That they had to hold that for morale purposes.
well, it was a Gibraltar of the Mississippi, and
right.
yes,
I mean,
that definitely was a morale thing. I mean, that's those people when they lost that fight, they were so embittered by particularly the women, that 4th of July was not celebrated in Vicksburg until World War II.
I've read that.
Okay,
so you've got this defend the river system. I guess Davis was in charge of the strategy. I mean, and he comes up with a static river defense that is just going to be set up to fall like dominoes. Was there a better strategy they could have put forth, or what could have been done better?
Well, you do the best you can with the resources that you have, and they simply did not have the shipyards and the resources and the access to the raw materials to manufacture what they needed. You had more ironworks in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania than you had in the entire Confederacy.
Right.
Okay.
Now,
and they were able to out manufacture the weapons that they needed, and the Confederacy simply could not do that. And once England shut off the spigot from that side of the pond, their supplies just of what they had to work with just kept going down, dwindling. And they could only manufacture so much iron plate with the facilities that they had, and you also only you had to have the right kinds of men too to operate and run these vessels, and they did not have as many. Unlike the Army, where the vast majority of the officer corps resigned their commission went to fight for the South, that was not the case with the Navy. That was not the case. You had some, Franklin Buchanan and Catesby Jones, but you didn't have anywhere near the numbers of that went and fought for the Confederacy on the naval side as you did Army side. So that
Here's
makes
an
a difference
argument that
too.
I've made to people, and some people said, I see your point on this, and of course other people argue said no. I said, look, with those gunboats and with a mobile army, that river defense, the Confederacy never had a chance to control the Mississippi. It cost them 100,000 men and over 100 big guns. He who defends everything defends nothing. I said, forget about the Mississippi River. Concede that. Keep your armies out in the field. Survive in advance. You can worry about that river later.
Well, I don't. Jefferson Davis beat an Alabama boy, um, and knowing that river well, just wasn't about to let it go. If he could possibly hold on to it, he just wasn't about to let it go. And you got to remember too, all of these states were screaming at him about defending them. So
Right.
that itself was a problem too. And trade up and down that thing. They just wanted to do the best they could with it, as much as they could with it. And they honestly thought that they could do the job.
But in
the
Vicksburg, why did Pemberton not? I mean, I know he's getting two different orders, but I mean, surely you see the handwriting on the wall. Why did he not take Joe Johnston's orders when he said break out and save your army?
the townspeople were all over him not to leave. The citizenry of Vicksburg were screaming bloody murder about being abandoned and left alone. And he was married to a Southern girl, and he he made that decision that I got to defend the people, I got to protect you. And by the time he realized, truthfully, that he was in a true pickle, it was too late for him to get out of there. And he was just going to do his best to. And you got to remember too, Joe Johnston's reputation, well earned, I might add, was someone who retreats before he fights.
Oh yeah, I've always called him retreating.
Okay,
Retreating Joe Johnston.
and
I mean, the man
Pemberton
almost
being
lost
yeah,
Richmond to Little Mac without firing a shot for all
yeah,
people.
Pemberton being a Yankee wanted to a Pennsylvania Yankee wanted to impress um, the Southern government, the administration, Davis administration, and the people of Vicksburg by his willingness to defend the city and do what was necessary to fight off the Yankee invaders. And unfortunately, that was the wrong attitude, and it cost them an entire army like that. And of course, the city and all of that went with it. So that's people do things for dumb reasons sometimes, and he was never really trusted.
There are some great river systems in Alabama that lead to different parts of the state. But I don't think there was ever really anything going on there. Was it because Alabama was just not part of, central part of the war?
You didn't have any major ports. You didn't have. I mean, the Tennessee flows down into Alabama, and you've got some others, but the Tuscaloosa. But they weren't rivers that were being utilized in the same way. Because with the Mississippi, you've got the Red, you got the Missouri, you got the Ohio, you got the Tennessee, all flowing into that river. Those are all major rivers. All right, and plus a dozen other tributaries as well. You did not, and of course that's going through Mississippi and Louisiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, and all that area. Alabama was kind of a sideshow in some ways. They never saw particularly the river warfare. Certainly, they didn't get any of that there. It wasn't deemed necessary. It wasn't deemed
So
necessary.
we
They
talked
wanted to
about
take out those ports. They wanted to control the main rivers, and if they controlled the main rivers, they cut the Confederacy in half. And they did exactly what they planned to do.
I mean, there's a great plan that General Scott came up with.
Well,
Let me go
Scott
ahead.
didn't quite come up with that whole plan on his own.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Her name is Anna Carroll.
Anna Carroll.
Anna Carroll was the daughter of a former governor of Maryland. She was a trained lawyer, and she had been carrying on an affair with John C. Breckinridge in Washington.
While he
When
was vice
okay, the vice president of the United States, all right. When
Wow.
he he gets elected, of course, senator, uh, because he ran for both the senator from his home state as well as the presidency in 1860, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he didn't win the presidency, but he was elected senator. He is in Washington, decides to cast his lot with the Confederacy. He went back home, Tennessee. She followed him, asked him if he was going to, stay faithful to her or go back to your wife. What are you going to do? And he basically rebuffed her. She went to the local libraries, Nashville and everything like that. And there's what's that expression about hell has no fury like a woman scorned?
Yeah.
Okay. She put together all of these maps, figured out all of the river systems, went back to D.C., presented that plan to Scott and others, who then took it to Lincoln, who approved it. Now, some people have said
A
that,
female in the 1860s with no military training,
yes, yes, but she was
no
very
understanding of
smart.
military strategy.
And people said, well,
And
did that really happen? Yes, the United States government gave her a pension after the war for her efforts involved with the war.
yeah,
So she was part of
I've
this.
never heard the story before, but
Yep,
that's an
look
amazing
up Anna
story.
Carroll. Yep, she she was a part of all this, and Scott, the newspapers are the ones that called it the Anaconda Plan. That wasn't Scott's name for it. That the newspapers came up with that. And it was the idea that Scott's giant snake was going to strangle the South, i.e., the Anaconda Plan. But Anna Carroll was a
Wow.
big part of this whole
I
thing,
mean,
and
that's
and they
insane.
couldn't give her credit because she was a woman.
And the
And
history books today, I mean, through college, has never mentioned that woman in
oh yeah,
anything. And
yeah, Anna Carroll.
I mean, a female with no military training or understanding of strategy, or that comes that is, oh man, that's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah,
Man,
well, it is told, but she became part of his administration. She was one of his writers, Lincoln's writers, and everything. But they had to keep again. Women just didn't do those things back then, so they
right?
yeah, she doesn't get anywhere. She didn't at the time get anywhere near the credit she actually deserved for all of this, because it was also the idea that if they presented this plan to the military powers that be, other than Winfield Scott, as a woman having come up with this, they'd have laughed it right out of the office.
Of course.
So because they just, women don't do those kinds of things. Well, yeah, that one did, uh, and she made them pay for it.
Let's talk about
So
this for a second. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
it's all right.
Um, we talked about the Brown Water River, and I've had people argue both sides of it, but how effective in reality was the Union blockade? I mean, was
Oh,
it
in
that
the beginning of
effective?
the war, the first year of the war, 1 out of 5 blockade running ships got caught. 1 out of 5. By the end of the war, it was almost 4 out of 5. They pretty much
Okay,
had it as they closed off the ports. That made it harder and harder and harder for these guys to get
right.
through. Now, all you had to do was make a couple of voyages successfully, and you had paid for the ship, because they made so much money off the sale of the merchandise that they brought in. Because what the Davis administration had decreed that 50% of every ship coming in had to bring in war materials. Well, these guys weren't listening. They were bringing in as much luxury items as they possibly could shove into their holds. Things like, fine wines, medicines, silk, whatever, the stuff that they could charge and get a high price for. So as a result of that, those ships you made a couple of successful voyages. Your ship was paid for. You were done. And everything after that was gravy. But the first year, it's about 1 in 5. And the second year, it gets up to 2. By the end of the year, they're at 3. By the end of 1863, they're pushing 4 out of. They're catching 4 out of 5.
So as each major port fell, it became
harder and harder to get through. Yep.
So I've got a hypothetical for you.
Okay.
I know it's hard to ask, but it's September 1862. Lee
Okay.
scores a massive victory at Sharpsburg. Confederate Congress agrees to a limited emancipation. Crops cotton crops have dried up in India because of a drought. England needs that for their textile industries, and that means war with the United States. Did the English Navy, were they capable of defeating the U.S. Navy at that time?
Oh, it would have been a hell of a fight. The British Navy, of course, was bigger, but we were in many ways we were much more modern.
Okay.
At the beginning of the war, the answer is no. The U.S. Navy would not have defeated the British Navy. By the end of the war, midway through the war to the end of the war, the American Navy could have I would say fought the British Navy to a standstill. The British Navy took longer to accept the concept of armored battleships and steam powered battleships, warships, I should say, than did the Americans. Yes, they were still using sailing vessels for quite a bit of their navy. I mean, that 1,000-ship navy. Okay, that's great. That's wonderful. If the ships can do anything, because you got to have wind. They did. At that point, we were actually ahead of them in terms of technology. They're gonna catch up pretty darn quick in certain ways, but in other ways they never catch up. I mean, they never caught up with us as far as submarines, for example. So Germans certainly did, but not the English.
That's my next question for you.
You got the Hunley doing its thing in the Civil War, and that doesn't happen again for another 50 years. And that's, of course, the U-boat that takes out the Lusitania.
How high on the list of military, innovative military things would you put the submarine? I mean, because that changed naval warfare.
Oh, it changed everything. Everything.
That has to be high on the list of
well, you got to remember, the Hunley is not the first submarine to ever attack an enemy ship. She's the first one to be successful at sinking one, but she's not the first one to ever attack an enemy ship. Okay. That was the Turtle in the American Revolution that was sent to attack British warships anchored in New York Harbor. And David Bushmill, it's a one-man submarine, sailed the thing right up against the keel of a British warship. When he started to try to drill through to attach the mine, he realized that the bottom of the warship was sheathed with copper sheathing, and his drill would not penetrate. So he backed off, and he was trying to get away. He gets away, but the Turtle was destroyed. Was beached and destroyed.
Okay. With the Hunley, did they have like a explosive that was on a long stick that was
the original mine was towed, and they realized that was too dangerous. Then the line could get snagged, get caught in something, and it could get and then it could be pulled in by the propeller up against them and then blow them up. Okay, so that in fact the movie that part of the movie is somewhat accurate as to what happened there. That's when they came up with Beauregard actually had something to do with that, by the way. That the idea of that putting the mine on that pipe and extending it out in front of them and plunging it into the side of the ship and then backing off. So yeah, it worked all right. Sure did. That's one of the great mysteries of war.
I was reading something the other day just because I was curious about it. um, uh, because it was something about the Lee guy had rounded him up when he was retreating from Petersburg. Um, but I don't really know. I know there was at the what was it, Ball's Bluff was battle, but the Confederate Marine Corps. I mean, I think there was
Very
900
small,
members.
very small,
Yeah.
very small.
Did was
Really,
there
really
anything
didn't
that
amount to
ever?
much of anything. Not really. Not the Confederate Marine Corps. I mean, they were there, but when trying to compare, it's like that's literally comparing apples to oranges
Yeah.
as far as that
What
comparison.
about the U.S. Marine Corps? I mean, the Federal
Well,
Union.
The U.S. Marine Corps was involved in all of these warships that went overseas.
Okay.
Okay, I mean
Okay.
they were manning those warships that went out hunting for the raiders and on the blockades and stuff like that. Those riflemen were Marines that were on those
Okay.
warships. Yeah.
Have you ever uh looked at figures that like what the casualties were, like how many Union ships were sunk, or how many sailors were killed, or anything like that?
Be honest with you, I forget the numbers off the
Yeah,
top
I
of my head.
figured
It's not
it.
as significant as some people might think it would be. There really are not that many that actually get sunk. You know, the Congress and the Cumberlands, those were kind of exceptions. Most the more ships were actually captured and turned around to be reused as Confederate vessels than were sunk. Other than the merchants, other than the merchant marine gets decimated. Like I said, 70% of the whaling fleet was wiped out.
Wow,
Totally
that is
wiped out.
amazing. And the ship
Yeah.
you mentioned, last one, surrender, because I'd read something, and I don't know if this is true or not, that there was one of the last ships or something that we found out was some vessel that was in the South Pacific.
Yes, CSS Shenandoah.
Okay, so that is true then.
Yes.
That it was in the South Pacific,
Yes.
and and they were like I said, go after whaling, and that is amazing that the Confederacy had a ship in the South Pacific. I mean, I wonder if
Well,
people actually knew that.
they all went all over the place. I mean, you chased you went after where the enemy vessels were, and the majority of them that's the Pacific Ocean. That was where the whaling fleets were,
That's
and
amazing.
so yeah, those boys were busy. They were busy between the Shenandoah, the Alabama, and the Florida. They were all busy doing their thing.
So
Not
is
just in the Pacific either. They were going up and down Florida went up and down the East Coast too, taking out merchant
and
ships and stuff.
as bad as they were mismatched, so to speak, with numbers. I mean, did the Confederate Navy do the best they could do against
Well,
what
yeah,
they was
but
up
you also
against?
remember something too about those raiders. A lot of the sailors on those ships, they weren't Americans.
Okay.
Okay, they were English and French in a lot of cases. So, and that also was another aspect of the excuse me, neutrality being violated. Semmes's crew on the Alabama, very few of his crew were actually Americans. Very few of his crew. A lot of his men were Englishmen. And when the Alabama got sunk by the Kearsarge, a whole lot of those boys went overboard and swam to a fishing boat that wasn't too far away from them, including Semmes, as a matter of fact, and got on that fishing boat. And because they were on in an English flagged ship, they couldn't touch them.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
yep.
Um, I mean that's been an amazing story. I mean that in the Civil War, we're talking school. We hear about the Hunley, and we don't hear about the other. And we hear about the Monitor Merrimack. We didn't hear about all the other ironclads that the Confederacy had. There's so much that's left out that we don't know about naval history. I mean,
If
this
you
is
go, there's a great museum in Georgia, Naval Museum in Georgia. There's also a very good, the CSS Noose is preserved in, I think it's Kinston, if I remember correctly, North Carolina. It's actually in a museum building now. And it's inside. And what they've done is the keel is still there. And they have made this metal like overlay that goes over the top so that you can see how the ship was actually laid out. But across the street from that, it's only open on the weekends, is a to scale duplicate of the noose. And my wife and I have gone through it and seen it and gone through it. And it's an amazing reproduction of the thing. And, those are things. Of course, you had the Albemarle, and you have a two-thirds size replica of that that's sailing on the Plymouth River, so people can see what one of those things looked like. But they didn't have a lot of firepower on these things. Okay, they only had a couple cannons.
I got a question. I wanted to, before I forget, that I thought of, that I always want to know: how devastating or how vital, or was it that much loss when the Confederates lost Norfolk?
Hampton Roads.
Yeah.
That was prior. When the Union lost it, that was the largest dry dock on the East Coast.
Right.
Gosport Naval Yard. Okay, so once they lost, when McClellan, marches in and everything, and they take all that and they invade, to lose that port, they really didn't have it, because the blockade was actually very effective at Hampton Roads. So they weren't able, because the CSS Virginia was stopped by the Monitor. They weren't able to break the blockade. They just brought in new ships to replace those ships. So in effect, they never really had the use of that port for the war.
Okay.
Right. Because just a few months after the Monitor and the Merrimack have their battle, McClellan, of course, takes that whole area. They take control of it, and there's nowhere for them to take the Merrimack. They can't take it up to James. It takes too much water. And so they ended up blowing her up and getting rid of it. Okay, well, that's it. They're done. And it wasn't seaworthy. It couldn't go out to sea. It wasn't designed to go out to sea. Neither was the Monitor, actually, for that matter, as we learned. But those ships were designed to fight in shallower water. Okay,
Man, this has been a great lesson.
Okay.
Before it's been a great lesson, and I don't want to keep you all night, but I want to talk to you about something else for a few minutes. Unless if you want to add something else to that, but I was wanting to ask you, how is things going with your screenplay?
Well, the writer's strike, of course, slowed everything down. So we're waiting for them to finish it up and do what's doing. We just put a new marketing campaign in place, hopefully, to help expedite that. We have a new agent working for us to replace the one that got fired because she was being a naughty girl, business-wise. But I also have another firm working for me now on the West Coast that's dealing with my second book. So hopefully something will happen in the not too distant future. They keep telling me you have to be patient, because this kind of business goes very, very slow, and then all of a sudden everything falls into place, and boom, things start to happen real fast. So we'll see.
I know you're excited, and hope to make money off of it like you may would, but do you think you're gonna get more? I mean, I guess some pleasure, enjoyment, of knowing that you wrote a book that's made it to MGM or TV.
Well, the Netflix is the one right now that they're actually trying to deal with. That's concerned.
Netflix, but that's just as good as.
I got it. I'll be honest with you. If it happens, I'll be happy. It's happier than a pig in slop, but I'm not banking on it too much.
That's part of that. Yeah.
All right, I'm really trying not to get overly excited. I tell you, I get as big a kick out of it when a student walks up to me and hands me a copy of my book and asks me to autograph it for him.
Oh, wow.
That happened just the other day. So,
how many copies of your books have you sold?
I can't. I'm not sure about the second one. The first one has sold several thousand at least.
That's awesome.
I know that there are copies of it from Alaska to Florida, from Massachusetts to California. And I know there are.
Just proud. And you say you was working on a third one?
Yeah, but that's taken a long time to write. I don't have the time to really focus on as much as I would like to. That has to deal with the Battle of Franklin. We actually went there last year again, and interviewed the guru of Franklin, which is Tom Cartwright. The man knows everything about that battle, and I mean everything. And interviewed him again for that. And I've been researching, I've been working on it, I've been writing it. It's a hard story to write because of the absolute violence of that particular battle. There's a reason why they call it the Second Pickett's Charge, but
Right.
it's horrible. It was the destruction of human life that took place in that fight is just horrendous, and
Yeah.
most people don't know about that.
Next time we talk, let's do that again, because when I did on the YouTube live thing, it wouldn't pick up your end. It could only hear me.
Okay.
So I didn't do it. So let's do that. Man, this was a great talk. Uh, I think that's all the questions I got for you. Is there anything you'd like to add to it?
No, just tell your listening audience, go out and buy it. Dawn's Gray Steel, which is about the Battle of Shiloh, and Tennessee Thunder, which is the sequel to Dawn's Gray Steel and covers the battles of Stones River and Chickamauga, and everything is told through the eyes of the individuals themselves. And it's Amazon rates both of them very high.
I'm going to put this in all the Civil War groups. It's been great, and we got to have some more of these more often because I miss them. But Dan Korn, everybody, thanks for being here, man.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Talk soon.
All right, bye-bye.